My son-in-law just tried to steal my $2 million farm at my daughter's wedding reception. I'm Galvin Taylor. What happened next destroyed his career, his marriage, and his freedom. Kyle Harper thought he'd found the perfect victim. A simple Iowa farmer, 63 years old, managing nearly $3 million in assets without professional help. Kyle spent 8 months convincing my daughter Rowena that her old man was too confused to handle complex finances. Tonight was supposed to be his big payday. Kyle brought fake legal documents, a fake notary, and 200 witnesses to pressure me into signing over everything I'd built. What Kyle didn't know? I'm a retired Fortune 500 forensic accountant who'd been investigating his elder abuse operation for 4 months. The recording I played at the reception, Kyle's voice discussing his $2 million payday from the old man who won't read the fine print. That was just the beginning. By the time Detective Foster led Kyle away in handcuffs, we'd exposed a criminal enterprise that had stolen $15 million from elderly victims across 3 states. Kyle called me a simple farmer who needed professional guidance. Turns out the simple farmer knew exactly how to destroy professional predators. Want to see how a quiet strategy can demolish loud arrogance? Hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories about people who learned the hard way that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake of your life. Here's how my daughter's perfect wedding became Kyle Harper's perfect nightmare. Let me back up 8 months. That's when Kyle Harper first walked into my life, arm in arm with my daughter Rowena at Sunday dinner. 35 years old, sharp suit, University of Iowa law degree hanging in his downtown Des Moines office, partner at Harper & Associates, specializing in what he called elder law. The way he said it, you'd think he was some kind of saint helping confused old folks. From day one, Kyle talked to me like I was hard of hearing. Slow, loud. "Galvin, how are you doing today?" Like I was 90 instead of 63. Rowena ate it up. "Dad, Kyle knows so much about estate planning. You should really listen to him." Kyle would pat my shoulder. "Rowena's right, Galvin. You're a simple man who built something beautiful here. But managing a $2.1 million operation? That requires professional expertise." Simple man. He said it at least once every visit. During Thanksgiving dinner, Kyle started his campaign in earnest. "Galvin, I've been thinking about your situation. 920 acres is a lot of responsibility for someone your age." "I manage just fine," I said, cutting my turkey. "Of course you do. But think about the tax implications, the liability exposure. What happens if something happens to you?" Kyle leaned forward, all concern. "Rowena would inherit a nightmare of probate issues." Rowena nodded along. "Dad, maybe Kyle has a point." "I've been thinking," Kyle continued. "We should set up a family trust, professional management. I could serve as trustee, take all that burden off your shoulders." I kept chewing. "I'll think about it." But Kyle wasn't done. Every visit brought new pressure, new reasons why a simple farmer like me needed his help. Christmas Eve. "Galvin, do you even know what your corn futures are trading at? The soybean market is volatile. You need professional oversight." New Year's Day. "I looked at your property taxes, Galvin. You're paying way too much. With proper legal structuring, I could save you $50,000 a year." Valentine's Day. "Rowena showed me your will, Galvin. It's a mess. 1 page? That won't hold up in probate. Your daughter could lose everything." Each time Rowena supported him. "Dad, Kyle's just trying to help." But it was the way Kyle's family treated me that really stung. Easter dinner at their house was like walking into a law firm's conference room. Kyle's father, senior partner, his mother, retired judge, his brother, corporate counsel for Principal Financial. They talked around me like I wasn't there. "Kyle's doing important work," his mother said, "helping people who can't help themselves." His father nodded. "Elder law is so necessary. These people built wealth but lacked the sophistication to protect it. These people." I was sitting right there. Kyle would translate everything for me, speaking slowly. "They're discussing tax strategies, Galvin. Complex stuff. Nothing you need to worry about." The breaking point came in March. Kyle brought documents to Sunday dinner. Thick legal papers in a leather portfolio. "I took the liberty of drafting some preliminary trust documents," he announced. "Just to show you what we're talking about, Galvin." I glanced at the first page. Irrevocable Family Trust. Grantor Galvin Taylor, trustee Kyle Harper. "This gives me full authority to manage the farm," Kyle explained, like he was talking to a child. "Sell parcels when necessary, reinvest proceeds, make all the complicated decisions." "What's in it for you?" I asked. Kyle smiled. "Just the satisfaction of helping family, Galvin. Though there is a standard trustee fee, 2% annually, very reasonable. 2% of 2 million was $40,000 every year, for life. I need time to think, I said. Kyle's expression tightened slightly. Of course. But Galvin, time is money in estate planning. The longer you wait, the more complicated things become. After they left, I sat on my porch looking at those 920 acres. 4 generations of Taylors had worked this land. I'd built it from the 40 acres my grandfather left me. Kyle thought I was just some simple farmer who lucked into wealth. He had no idea I'd spent 30 years as a CPA before I came home to farm. Audited Fortune 500 companies. Knew more about financial manipulation than he'd learned in law school. That night, I made a decision. If Kyle wanted to play games, I'd play along, but I was going to find out exactly who I was dealing with. The next morning, I called a private investigator in Des Moines. I need you to look into someone for me. Kyle Harper, attorney. I want to know everything. How deep do you want me to dig? She asked. Deep enough to find out if he's done this before. What she found would change everything. But Kyle didn't know that yet. He thought he had me right where he wanted me, an old farmer too simple to see through his scheme. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Let me tell you what was really at stake here. It wasn't just money. 920 acres of prime Iowa farmland. Black soil so rich you can grow anything. Corn yields averaging 180 bushels per acre, soybeans hitting 65 bushels. Current market value, $2.1 million. But that was just the land. Add in the grain bins, the John Deere equipment, the farmhouse my great-grandfather built in 1923, my life insurance policies, retirement accounts, the mineral rights I'd accumulated over 40 years. Kyle was positioning himself to control nearly $3 million in assets, and with me as grantor of an irrevocable trust, I'd have no power to stop him. The legal papers he'd shown me were cleverly written. Once I signed, Kyle could sell parcels for the benefit of the family, lease ground to whoever offered him the best kickback, even mortgage the property to fund investment opportunities, all perfectly legal, all impossible to undo. But the money wasn't what scared me most. It was watching my daughter get pulled into Kyle's web. Rowena had started talking differently, using Kyle's phrases. Dad, you're getting older. You need professional guidance. Kyle says successful people delegate complex decisions. Why are you being so stubborn about accepting help? My own daughter, questioning 40 years of financial success because her husband convinced her I was incompetent. If Kyle got control of the farm, Rowena would never see a dime. Trustee fees, management expenses, consulting costs, Kyle would bleed the operation dry while keeping everything technically legal. And when I died, Kyle would control Rowena's inheritance. She'd be dependent on his goodwill for the rest of her life. I'd seen it before back in my CPA days. Elderly clients who signed over power of attorney to helpful relatives. 6 months later, their accounts were empty and their families were destroyed. The signs were all there. Kyle's pressure tactics, his insistence on irrevocable documents, the way he isolated me from Rowena during financial discussions. Classic elder financial abuse. Textbook predatory behavior, but I had advantages Kyle didn't know about. 30 years of forensic accounting experience. A licensed CPA who'd investigated corporate fraud schemes worth hundreds of millions. Kyle thought he was the smartest person in the room. He had no idea he was dealing with someone who'd built a career exposing people exactly like him. Still, I had to be careful. Push back too hard and I'd lose Rowena forever. She genuinely believed Kyle was protecting her interests. In her mind, I was the problem, a stubborn old man too proud to accept help. So I started playing a different game. Let Kyle think he was winning while I gathered evidence. Smile and nod during his presentations while my investigator dug into his background. The preliminary report arrived in April. 12 pages that made my blood run cold. Kyle Harper had done this before, multiple times. 3 active lawsuits against him for elder financial abuse. A pattern of targeting widowed farmers and business owners. Complaints filed with the Iowa State Bar Association. But the worst part? He was accelerating his timeline. According to my investigator, Kyle had already identified his next targets. A 78-year-old widow with a grain elevator business. An 82-year-old rancher whose children lived out of state. Kyle wasn't just after my farm. He was running a systematic operation, moving from victim to victim. That's when I knew this had to end at the wedding. Rowena deserved to know the truth before she legally bound herself to a predator. And those other potential victims deserved protection. But Kyle had chosen the worst possible venue for his final move. 200 guests, his legal colleagues, Judge Amanda Collins, my old college friend, officiating the ceremony. If Kyle wanted to play hardball at my daughter's wedding, I'd give him a game he'd never forget. The wedding day started perfectly. April 12th, bright spring morning in Des Moines. The Legacy Ballroom looked beautiful. Crystal chandeliers, ivory linens, 200 of our closest friends and family. Rowena was radiant. For a moment, watching her walk down the aisle, I forgot about everything else. My little girl was getting married. Judge Amanda Collins performed the ceremony. Amanda and I went back 40 years, to our accounting program at Iowa State. She'd gone into law, eventually becoming one of Iowa's most respected judges before retiring last year. During the reception, Kyle worked the room like a politician, shaking hands with his legal colleagues, introducing Rowena as the daughter of a very successful farmer. But I could see the calculation in his eyes. This wasn't celebration for Kyle. It was a business opportunity. Around 9 p.m., Kyle approached me at the head table. "Galvin, could I have everyone's attention?" He didn't wait for an answer. Kyle grabbed a microphone from the DJ booth and tapped it twice. "Excuse me, everyone, if I could have your attention for just a moment." The ballroom quieted. 200 faces turned toward us. "I wanted to share something special with all of you," Kyle announced, his courtroom voice carrying to every corner. "As you know, Rowena and I are starting our life together, but we're also gaining a wonderful father-in-law." Polite applause. Rowena beamed at me. "Galvin Taylor is one of Iowa's most successful farmers, 920 acres of prime agricultural land, a true American success story." More applause. I felt the trap closing. But as an attorney specializing in elder law, I know how overwhelming it can be for someone Galvin's age to manage such complex assets. The room shifted slightly. This wasn't a toast anymore. Kyle reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather document folder. "So Rowena and I have been working with Galvin on a solution, a family trust that will protect his legacy while providing professional management." My jaw tightened. We'd never agreed to anything. "In fact," Kyle continued, his smile growing wider, "Galvin and I have been discussing this arrangement for months. Haven't we, Galvin?" Every eye in the room was on me, including Rowena's. Her expression was hopeful, trusting. I nodded slowly. "We've discussed it." "Wonderful." Kyle opened the folder with a flourish. "I've brought the trust documents tonight. I thought it would be meaningful to make this official in front of our family and friends." A murmur ran through the crowd. Kyle's legal colleagues nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of forward-thinking estate planning they'd expect. Kyle gestured to a woman near the back. "I've even arranged for Margaret Wilson, a licensed notary, to witness the signing." The woman stepped forward. Mid-50s, professional attire, carrying an official-looking briefcase. She introduced herself to several guests as Kyle's notary associate. "This is highly irregular," I said quietly. Kyle's microphone picked up every word. "Galvin, I understand it feels overwhelming. These are complex legal documents, but that's exactly why you need professional guidance." He turned back to the crowd. "As many of you know, Galvin is a simple farmer who's built something remarkable through hard work and dedication, but managing a multi-million-dollar operation requires specialized expertise." Simple farmer. There it was again. "The trust we've structured will ensure Galvin can enjoy his retirement while protecting Rowena's inheritance. I'll serve as trustee, handling all the complicated financial decisions." Kyle set the documents on our table with ceremony. "These papers transfer the farm into an irrevocable family trust. Very standard, very protective." I picked up the first page. At first glance, it looked legitimate. Professional formatting, legal terminology, official seals. But my CPA training kicked in. I started reading the fine print. Paragraph 12. Trustee shall have absolute discretion over all trust assets, including authority to sell, mortgage, or encumber any property without grant or consent. Paragraph 18. Trustee compensation shall be 2% annually of total trust value, payable quarterly. Paragraph 23. This trust is irrevocable and may not be modified or terminated without unanimous consent of all trustees. Kyle was the only named trustee. "Galvin?" Kyle's voice carried a note of impatience. "The documents are straightforward, standard trust language." I looked up at 200 expectant faces. Rowena's eyes were bright with excitement. Kyle's legal colleagues were nodding approval. "I'd like to review these more carefully," I said. Kyle's smile flickered. "Of course. But Galvin, it's your daughter's wedding night. Surely we can handle a simple signature?" The pressure was perfect. Social, professional, familial. Kyle had played this beautifully. create a public moment where refusing to sign would embarrass Rowena and disappoint 200 guests. But Kyle had made one critical mistake. He'd tried to run his scam in front of Judge Amanda Collins. "Actually," I said, looking directly at Kyle, "I think Judge Collins should take a look at these documents first." Kyle's confidence wavered for just a second. "That's not necessary, Galvin. These are standard—" "Amanda," I called out, "would you mind lending your legal expertise?" Judge Collins approached our table with interest. "Of course, Galvin. What do we have here?" Kyle forced a smile. "Just some family trust documents, basic estate planning." Amanda picked up the papers and began reading. Her expression grew increasingly serious as she worked through the pages. The ballroom waited in awkward silence. Wedding guests sensed something was wrong but couldn't identify what. "Kyle," Amanda said finally, "could you explain paragraph 12 to me?" Kyle's jaw tightened. "Standard trustee authority language? This gives you absolute control over Galvin's assets, including the right to sell without his consent. That's for efficiency. Complex decisions require, and paragraph 23 makes the trust irrevocable. Galvin would have no recourse if he disagreed with your management." Kyle's face was flushing. "Judge Collins, with respect, this is a family matter. These documents have been carefully reviewed. By whom?" Amanda's voice carried the authority of 30 years on the bench. Kyle gestured weakly toward his notary associate. "Margaret Wilson is a licensed notary. I'm asking about legal review. Who drafted these documents?" "My firm, Harper & Associates. We specialize in elder law." Amanda set the papers down. "Galvin, have you had independent legal counsel review this trust?" All eyes were on me again. I could feel Rowena's confusion, Kyle's growing panic, the crowd's mounting tension. "No," I said. "Kyle assured me that wasn't necessary." "I see." Amanda's tone was carefully neutral, but I caught her meaning. Kyle stepped forward. "Judge Collins, I appreciate your concern, but this is really between family members. Galvin has been involved in every discussion." "Have you, Galvin?" Amanda looked directly at me. This was my moment. I could expose Kyle right here, right now, produce the investigation file, reveal his pattern of elder abuse, destroy him in front of 200 witnesses, but Rowena was standing right there, glowing in her wedding dress, looking between her new husband and her father with growing alarm. I thought about what my wife would have wanted. She'd always said you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. Kyle's been very thorough in his explanations, I said carefully. Amanda nodded. "I'm sure he has. But Galvin, as your friend, I'd strongly recommend independent legal review before signing any irrevocable documents." Kyle's confidence was cracking. "There's really no need for delays. Time is money in estate planning." "Actually," I interrupted, "I've been doing some research of my own." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Kyle forced a laugh. "Research? Galvin, you don't need to worry about legal complexities. That's what professionals are for." "Oh, I'm not researching legal issues," I said. "I hired a private investigator." Dead silence. Rowena stared at me. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Kyle's face had gone pale. "Galvin, I don't understand. She's very thorough. Former FBI, specialized in white-collar crime." I looked directly at Kyle. "She's been investigating you for 4 months." Kyle tried to maintain his composure. That's ridiculous. "Why would you—" "Because something felt wrong." I stood up slowly. "All this pressure, all this urgency, the way you talked to me like I was incompetent." The crowd was riveted now. This wasn't a wedding toast anymore. This was a confrontation. "Galvin," Kyle said, his lawyer voice strained, "you're embarrassing yourself. And Rowena." "Am I?" I reached into my jacket pocket. "Because I have an 89-page report that suggests otherwise." Kyle's eyes locked onto my pocket. "What kind of report?" I smiled for the first time all evening. "The kind that shows you've done this before." Kyle's composure completely shattered. "Galvin, you're making a scene. This is Rowena's wedding. You're right." I looked around the ballroom. "This is my daughter's wedding, the most important day of her life, and you chose tonight to try to steal my farm." Gasps echoed through the crowd. Rowena's hand flew to her mouth. "Dad, what are you saying?" Rowena's voice was barely a whisper. Kyle recovered quickly, shifting into damage control mode. "Everyone, please don't let this confusion spoil Rowena's special day. Galvin is clearly overwhelmed." "Overwhelmed?" I pulled the investigation file from my jacket. 89 pages, spiral-bound, color-coded tabs. "Kyle, do you know what this is?" Kyle stared at the file like it was a rattlesnake. "Galvin, please. This is a complete background investigation into Kyle Harper and Harper & Associates." I opened to the first tab. 3 active lawsuits for elder financial abuse. The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Kyle's legal colleagues leaned forward in their chairs. Those are frivolous lawsuits, Kyle stammered. Disgruntled clients. 12 separate complaints filed with the Iowa State Bar Association. I flipped to tab 2. All alleging the same pattern. Target elderly clients. Pressure them into irrevocable trusts. Drain their assets through management fees. Kyle's face was crimson. These are lies. Character assassination. Mrs. Dorothy Henderson, age 78. Grain elevator business worth $1.2 million. You convinced her to transfer everything into a trust you managed. 6 months later, she was living in a nursing home while you sold her property. The crowd was dead silent now. Even the wedding band had stopped playing. Rowena was staring at Kyle in horror. Kyle, is this true? Rowena, baby, your father is confused. He's been manipulated by whoever gave him this propaganda. Robert Chen, age 82, cattle ranch in Grundy County. You used the exact same trust documents, same language about professional management. I held up the papers Kyle had brought. Word for word identical to what you're trying to get me to sign tonight. Kyle was sweating now. Those are template documents. All trusts use similar. And then there's this. I pulled out a small digital recorder. My investigator is very good at her job. Kyle's eyes went wide. What is that? A recording from last month, you and your colleague discussing my case. I pressed play. Kyle's voice filled the ballroom through the sound system. This farm is a $2 million payday. The old man won't even read the fine print. Simple farmers never do. The gasp from the crowd was audible. Rowena's face crumpled. Turn that off! Kyle lunged for the recorder. I pulled it back. There's more. You want to hear the part where you call me a perfect mark because I'm too proud to admit I need help? Galvin, stop this. Or the part where you say Rowena is easy to manipulate because she wants to believe she's protecting me? Rowena made a sound like she'd been punched. Kyle spun toward the crowd, his lawyer instincts kicking in. Ladies and gentlemen, this is clearly a setup. Someone has manipulated Galvin into believing... Actually, came a voice from the back of the room. The investigation is quite thorough. Everyone turned. Detective Ray Foster, Story County Sheriff's Department, stepped forward, tall, authoritative, in his dress uniform. Detective Foster, I said, thank you for coming. Kyle's mouth fell open. You called the police? I invited Ray to Rowena's wedding months ago. Old family friend. I smiled at Kyle, though I did mention he might want to see some interesting evidence tonight. Detective Foster approached our table. Mr. Harper, I understand you've been pressuring Mr. Taylor to sign trust documents? This is harassment, Kyle blustered. I'm an attorney. I don't have to submit to... You're absolutely right. You don't have to answer any questions. Foster's voice was calm, professional. But I am curious about these documents you brought tonight. Kyle clutched the trust papers defensively. These are legitimate legal instruments. May I see them? Judge Collins extended her hand. Kyle hesitated, then reluctantly handed over the papers. Amanda examined them under the ballroom's crystal lighting. Detective Foster, these documents contain several concerning elements. False notarization, fraudulent legal language, deceptive trust provisions. False notarization? Foster looked toward the woman Kyle had introduced as his notary associate. Margaret Wilson was gone. Her briefcase, her official stamps, her professional demeanor vanished. Where's your notary, Kyle? I asked. Kyle looked around wildly. She must have... she was never a real notary, I said. Part of your standard setup. Create fake legal authenticity to pressure victims into signing. Foster nodded. Mr. Harper, I think we need to have a conversation. Downtown. You can't arrest me. I haven't committed any crime. Attempted fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit theft. Foster's handcuffs appeared with practiced efficiency. You brought fake legal documents to pressure a 63-year-old man into transferring $2 million in assets. The ballroom was in chaos now. Kyle's legal colleagues were backing away like he had a contagious disease. Wedding guests were pulling out phones, recording everything. Rowena, Kyle called desperately as Foster cuffed him. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Your father is confused. But Rowena wasn't looking at Kyle anymore. She was staring at me with a mixture of shock, admiration, and growing understanding. Dad, she said quietly, you knew all along. I knew enough, I replied. Kyle thought he was dealing with a simple farmer who wouldn't read the fine print. Foster began leading Kyle toward the exit. "You have the right to remain silent, Mr. Harper." "This is a setup," Kyle shouted over his shoulder. "Galvin Taylor orchestrated this whole thing." I looked around the ballroom, 200 faces staring at me with new respect. Kyle's colleagues examining their own practices, Rowena beginning to understand how close she'd come to disaster. "Kyle," I called out just before he reached the door. He turned back, handcuffed and humiliated. "I did orchestrate this. That's what happens when you underestimate people." Kyle's face contorted with rage and defeat. "You think you're so smart." "No, Kyle. I think you're predictable." Foster led him away. The ballroom erupted in conversation, guests processing what they'd just witnessed. But my attention was on Rowena, my daughter, standing in her wedding dress trying to understand how her perfect day had become a crime scene. This was the hard part. Everything else had been strategy. This was family. Rowena stood frozen in her wedding dress, staring at the empty doorway where her husband had just been arrested. The reception hall buzzed with shocked conversations, but she seemed to hear none of it. "Dad," she whispered, "I don't understand." "Kyle was trying to help us. He said you needed—" "Rowena, honey, let me explain something." I gestured to 2 chairs away from the crowd. Kyle wasn't trying to help anyone but himself. She sank into a chair, her wedding bouquet trembling in her hands. "But he's a lawyer. He specializes in elder law. He showed me all these cases where families lost everything because they didn't plan properly. Those were real cases, just not the way Kyle described them. I opened the investigation file. Those families lost everything because Kyle stole it from them." Judge Collins approached us quietly. "Rowena, your father asked me to review Kyle's background 3 months ago. I wish the news was better." "You've known about this for 3 months?" Rowena's voice cracked. I suspected something was wrong. The investigation confirmed it. I pulled out a document with an official seal. "Rowena, this is Kyle's disciplinary record with the Iowa State Bar Association." Rowena took the paper with shaking hands. Her eyes moved down the page, growing wider with each line. 12 complaints in 2 years, she read aloud. Misappropriation of client funds, breach of fiduciary duty, elder financial abuse. She looked up at me. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me. You loved him, you trusted him. If I'd just accused Kyle without proof, who would you have believed?" Rowena was quiet for a long moment. "I would have believed him." "Kyle was counting on that. It's how predators work. They isolate their victims from people who might protect them." Judge Collins sat down beside Rowena. "Your father handled this exactly right. He gathered evidence. He waited for Kyle to reveal his true intentions. He protected you the only way he could." "But I defended him," Rowena said, tears starting to flow. "Every time you questioned Kyle's motives, I took his side. I thought you were being paranoid and stubborn." "That's what Kyle wanted you to think." I flipped to another section of the file. "Rowena, look at this timeline." The page showed a detailed schedule of Kyle's visits and escalating pressure tactics. October, first mention of estate planning needs. November, first criticism of my financial management. December, introduction of trust concept. January, pressure for quick decisions. February, threats about tax consequences. Rowena studied the timeline. It's like he was following a script. He was. Kyle has used the exact same approach with at least 6 other families. I showed her another document. Same timeline, same pressure points, same urgent deadlines. Mrs. Henderson's case, Judge Collins added, followed this pattern precisely. Kyle spent 8 months convincing her daughter that Dorothy needed professional help managing her grain elevator business. "What happened to her?" Rowena asked. Kyle drained her accounts through management fees and unnecessary transactions. When Dorothy realized what was happening, Kyle claimed she was developing dementia and couldn't make rational decisions. Rowena covered her face with her hands. "Oh God, he said the same thing about Dad, that his age was making him paranoid and suspicious." "Classic elder abuse tactic," I said. "Discredit the victim's mental capacity when they start asking questions. But Dad, you're not just some vulnerable elderly person, you're—" Rowena paused, realization dawning. "Wait, Kyle always called you a simple farmer, but you're not, are you?" I smiled for the first time all evening. "Rowena, what do you think I did before I came home to farm?" "You worked in accounting, but Kyle made it sound like bookkeeping for the local co-op." Judge Collins laughed. "Rowena, your father was one of the most respected forensic accountants in the Midwest. He audited Fortune 500 companies for 30 years. Rowena's mouth fell open. What? I'm a licensed CPA. I've investigated fraud schemes worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Corporate embezzlement, securities fraud, money laundering. I tapped the investigation file. Finding dirt on Kyle Harper was easier than most cases I worked. You let him think you were just a farmer? I let him think what he wanted to think. Kyle saw what he expected to see. An old man who lucked into wealth and didn't understand complex financial matters. Rowena was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. You've been investigating him this whole time? 4 months. Kyle thought he was manipulating me, but I was documenting every conversation, every pressure tactic, every lie he told you about my supposed incompetence. I pulled out another folder. Rowena, this is what Kyle was really after. The documents showed the true value of the farm operation. Current market assessments, profit projections, expansion opportunities. 2.1 million in land value, but factor in the mineral rights, the development potential, the wind energy leases I've been negotiating. I looked at Rowena. Kyle wasn't positioning himself to manage a small family farm. He was positioning himself to control a multi-million-dollar agricultural operation. How much? Rowena's voice was barely audible. Conservative estimate, 4.5 million over the next 10 years. Judge Collins whistled softly. Kyle must have done his homework to identify this opportunity. Oh, he did. I flipped to another section. Kyle's firm has been targeting successful farmers throughout central Iowa. They research property values, family dynamics, identify vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities? Single parents, recent widowers, farmers whose children live far away. I looked at Rowena. And farmers whose daughters marry into legal families that can provide credibility and pressure. The words hit Rowena like a physical blow. He married me to get to you? I reached over and took her hand. I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe it started genuine and turned opportunistic. Maybe it was calculated from the beginning. Does it matter now? Rowena was crying freely now, her wedding makeup streaking down her cheeks. I brought him into our family. I defended him. I thought you were the problem. Rowena, you're not responsible for Kyle's choices. He's a professional manipulator. This is what he does for a living. But I should have seen the signs. I should have protected you instead of what? Loving your husband and wanting him to get along with your father? That's not a character flaw, Rowena. That's being a good daughter and a good wife. Judge Collins stood up. Rowena, I need to ask you something important. Did Kyle ever pressure you to sign any documents? Powers of attorney? Joint accounts? Rowena thought for a moment. He wanted me to be added to his business accounts. Said it was for estate planning purposes. And he suggested I give him power of attorney over my inheritance, just in case something happened to Dad. My blood ran cold. Did you sign anything? No. I kept saying we had plenty of time after the wedding. Rowena looked up at me with fresh horror. That's why he was pushing so hard tonight, wasn't it? Once he had control of the farm, he would have had access to everything. Everything, I confirmed. The farm, your inheritance, and legal authority to make decisions on your behalf. Rowena was quiet for several minutes, processing the magnitude of Kyle's betrayal. Finally, she looked up at me. Dad, I owe you an apology, and I need to know something. What? The farm. Is it really protected? Or was Kyle right about the estate planning issues? I smiled and pulled out one final folder. Rowena, meet your inheritance planning. Properly executed. The documents were impressive. Professional formatting, multiple legal seals, thick paper stock. Irrevocable family trust, established January 15th. Grantor, Galvin Taylor. Trustee, First National Bank of Iowa, Trust Department. Beneficiary, Rowena Taylor Harper. Judge Collins examined the papers. Galvin, this is beautifully structured. Who drafted these? Blackstone, Meyer & Associates, best estate planning firm in Iowa. Rowena looked confused. When did you do this? The day after Kyle first mentioned trust arrangements. If he wanted to play legal games, I figured I should get ahead of him. So the farm is really protected? Completely. Bank trustee, not family member. Professional oversight, not personal control. And Rowena, you inherit everything when I pass, but Kyle can never touch it. Rowena was staring at the documents in amazement. So all his pressure, all his urgency about estate planning was completely unnecessary. I'd already handled everything properly. I looked around the ballroom where guests were still processing the evening's events. Kyle brought fake documents to pressure me into signing over assets I'd already protected legally. Judge Collins shook her head. The audacity is stunning. He must have been confident Galvin would never seek independent legal advice. Kyle counted on me being intimidated by legal complexity. He figured a simple farmer wouldn't know the difference between legitimate estate planning and outright theft. Rowena wiped her eyes with her napkin. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "Of course. Did you suspect Kyle from the very beginning, or did you give him a chance?" I considered the question carefully. "I wanted to like him, Rowena, I really did. When you brought him home that first Sunday, I was prepared to welcome him into the family." "What changed your mind?" "The way he talked to me. The condescension. The assumption that success in farming meant I was lucky rather than smart." I paused. But what really triggered my suspicions was his insistence on irrevocable documents. Why? In legitimate estate planning, you maintain some control, revocable trusts, limited powers of attorney, oversight mechanisms. Kyle wanted total, permanent control with no recourse if things went wrong. Judge Collins nodded. "That's the hallmark of financial predators. They create legal structures that are impossible to undo." "So the investigation," Rowena said slowly, "was you protecting both of us. I was protecting what your mother and I built for you. 4 generations of Taylor family history, your inheritance, your future." Rowena looked around the ballroom. Many guests had left, but Kyle's legal colleagues remained, talking in hushed groups near the bar. "Dad, what happens now? To Kyle, I mean." "That depends on several factors. The criminal charges Detective Foster files, the Bar Association investigation, whether Kyle's other victims decide to pursue civil suits." "And to me?" I took her hand. "What do you want to happen, sweetheart?" "I want to annul this marriage. I want to make sure Kyle can never hurt anyone else, and I want to learn how to protect the farm the way you do." "The first 2 are definitely possible. The third?" I smiled. "Rowena, you have an MBA in agricultural business. You're already better qualified than Kyle ever was. I never thought about taking over the operation." "You never had to think about it. I always planned for you to inherit a secure, well-managed farm, not a financial mess created by a predatory son-in-law." Judge Collins stood up. "I should check on the legal proceedings. Galvin, you'll need to provide your investigation file to Detective Foster." "Of course. And Amanda, thank you for everything. Thank you for trusting me with the truth. Kyle might have fooled a lot of people, but not tonight." After Judge Collins left, Rowena and I sat quietly for a moment. The wedding reception had become something entirely different, but maybe something more important. "Dad, I have one more question." "What's that?" "When you said you were selling the farm in your announcement, was that just to throw Kyle off?" I laughed. "Rowena, I never said I was selling the farm. Kyle assumed that's what I meant when I said he wouldn't get control of it." "So the farm stays in the family?" "It stays in the Taylor family, where it's belonged for 4 generations, where it will belong for the next 4 generations. Rowena smiled through her tears. "Kyle really didn't know who he was dealing with, did he? Kyle thought intelligence was loud and credentials were everything. He never understood that real power is quiet, patient, and strategic. Like waiting 4 months to gather evidence instead of confronting him immediately? Exactly like that." Rowena stood up and smoothed her wedding dress. "Dad, I think I'd like to go home now, to the farm. I want to see the operation the way you see it, not as a problem that needs professional management, but as a legacy worth protecting." I stood up and offered her my arm. "Rowena, there's nothing I'd like more." As we walked toward the exit, Rowena paused. "Dad, one last thing." "Yes?" "Next time someone tries to manipulate our family, can we skip the 4-month investigation and just call Detective Foster on day 1? I laughed. "Deal. But Rowena, I don't think anyone's going to try this again." "Why not?" "Because by tomorrow morning, every attorney in Iowa is going to know what happened to Kyle Harper. Word travels fast in legal circles." Rowena nodded. "Good. Maybe this will protect Kyle's next intended victims." "That's the idea, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to make an example of someone to protect everyone else." We walked out of the legacy ballroom together, leaving behind the wreckage of Kyle's scheme and the beginning of Rowena's real education in protecting the Taylor family legacy. Detective Foster was waiting in the ballroom lobby with 2 other officers and a stern-looking woman in a business suit. "Mr. Taylor," Foster said, "this is Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Martinez. She'd like to speak with you about pressing charges." Martinez stepped forward. "Mr. Taylor, we have Kyle Harper in custody on preliminary charges of attempted fraud and elder abuse, but we need your cooperation to build a strong case." "What do you need from me?" Everything. The investigation file, the recordings, documentation of Kyle's pressure tactics. This looks like part of a larger criminal enterprise. I handed over the complete investigation file. 89 pages. My investigator is former FBI. Every source is documented and verifiable. Martinez flipped through the file with growing interest. This is incredibly thorough. Financial records, victim statements, pattern analysis. She looked up at me. Mr. Taylor, you realize this evidence could shut down Kyle's entire operation? That's the idea. We're talking about multiple felony charges. Kyle could face 10 to 15 years in prison. Rowena stepped forward. What about his other victims? Mrs. Henderson and the others? We'll be contacting them tomorrow. With this evidence, they may be able to recover their stolen assets. Martinez paused. Mr. Taylor, I have to ask, why didn't you report Kyle's activities when you first discovered them? Because I needed ironclad evidence. Kyle's a lawyer. He knows how to create plausible deniability. Claim everything was legitimate legal advice. I gestured to the file. I needed him to attempt the actual fraud in front of witnesses. 200 witnesses, Foster added approvingly. Including a retired judge and half the Des Moines legal community, Martinez nodded. Mr. Taylor, your approach was unconventional, but it was smart. Kyle can't claim this was a misunderstanding when he brought fake notarization and fraudulent documents to your daughter's wedding. What happens next? Rowena asked. Kyle will be arraigned tomorrow morning. Given the evidence and the flight risk, we'll request no bail. Martinez closed the file. Mr. Taylor, would you be willing to testify if this goes to trial? Absolutely. And Miss Harper, I'm sorry, Miss Taylor, would you be willing to testify about Kyle's manipulation tactics regarding your father? Rowena straightened her shoulders. Yes. If it helps protect other families, yes. Foster's radio crackled. He listened for a moment, then looked at us with satisfaction. Kyle just requested a lawyer. Apparently, he's claiming this was all a setup and demanding prosecutorial misconduct charges against us. I laughed. Of course he is. Kyle can't accept that he was outsmarted by a simple farmer. Well, his lawyer is going to have a difficult time explaining the recording where Kyle calls you a perfect mark and discusses his $2 million payday, Martinez said. That evidence alone establishes criminal intent. Detective Foster checked his watch. Mr. Taylor, we'll need you to come downtown tomorrow to give a formal statement. Can you be there at 9 a.m.? I'll be there. As the law enforcement team prepared to leave, Martinez turned back to us. Mr. Taylor, off the record, what you did tonight was remarkable. Kyle Harper has been operating his scam for at least 3 years. You're probably the first victim who was prepared for him. I wasn't a victim, I corrected. I was a target. There's a difference. What's the difference? Victims get surprised. Targets get prepared. After the officials left, Rowena and I found ourselves alone in the lobby. The wedding guests had mostly departed, leaving behind flower arrangements and the lingering evidence of Kyle's public humiliation. Dad, can I ask you something personal? Of course. When you decided to investigate Kyle, were you scared about what you might find? I considered the question. I was scared about what I might not find. If Kyle had been legitimate, I would have looked like a paranoid old man who destroyed his daughter's marriage for no reason. But you kept investigating anyway. Rowena, in my 30 years as a CPA, I learned to trust my instincts about financial predators. Something about Kyle felt wrong from the beginning. What specifically? The timeline. Legitimate estate planning happens over months or years. Kyle wanted everything signed immediately. That's pressure, not planning. Rowena nodded slowly. And I was so focused on wanting you two to get along that I missed all the warning signs. You weren't supposed to see the warning signs. Kyle is a professional. He spent years perfecting his approach. But you saw through it. I had advantages Kyle didn't know about. Professional experience with fraud cases, financial resources to hire investigators, and patience to let Kyle reveal his true intentions. Rowena looked around the empty ballroom. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I want complete honesty. Always. If Kyle had been legitimate, if he really was just trying to help with estate planning, would you have considered his suggestions? I smiled. Rowena, I consulted with 3 different estate planning attorneys before I established the trust in January. If Kyle had been legitimate, I would have welcomed his input. But you never told him about the existing trust. No, I wanted to see what Kyle was really after. A legitimate attorney would have asked about existing estate planning before suggesting new arrangements. And Kyle never asked. Kyle assumed I was too simple to have done any planning. That assumption revealed his true motivations. Rowena was quiet for a moment. "Dad, I think I understand now why you handled this the way you did." "Do you? You weren't just protecting the farm, you were protecting me. If you'd just accused Kyle without proof, I would have had to choose between my husband and my father. And that wouldn't have been fair to you. So you waited until Kyle revealed himself in a way I couldn't deny or rationalize. I let Kyle destroy himself with his own actions. Sometimes that's the only way people can see the truth." Rowena hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry I defended him. I'm sorry I let him make me think you were the problem. Rowena, you have nothing to apologize for. You acted with love and good intentions. Kyle acted with greed and deception. There's no comparison." "What happens now? To us, I mean?" I looked at my daughter, still in her wedding dress, but no longer the naive young woman who'd walked down the aisle 8 hours earlier. "Now we go home. And tomorrow, we start planning your real future, one that doesn't include Kyle Harper." 3 weeks later, I was sitting on my front porch reading the Des Moines Register when Rowena pulled into the driveway. She'd been staying at the farm since the wedding, sleeping in her old room while she sorted through the legal mess Kyle had left behind. "How'd it go at the courthouse?" I called out. Rowena climbed the porch steps with a thick manila folder under her arm. "The annulment is final. Legally, my marriage to Kyle Harper never existed. And emotionally, getting better every day." She settled into the porch swing beside me. "Dad, you need to see this." Rowena opened the folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. "Kyle's been formally charged with 17 felony counts: fraud, elder abuse, racketeering, conspiracy." She looked up at me. 17 counts, Dad." "How many victims?" "They've identified 12 so far, but the FBI thinks there might be more." Rowena flipped through the pages. "Mrs. Henderson alone lost $800,000. I shook my head. How did Kyle explain away that much missing money? Management fees, investment losses, operating expenses. He had documentation for everything. Fake, but convincing. What about the other victims? Similar patterns. Kyle would gain control of their assets, then slowly drain the accounts while providing plausible explanations for the losses. Rowena handed me another document. "This is the most disturbing part. Kyle's firm was specifically targeting rural families with substantial assets but limited legal sophistication." I read through the FBI analysis. Kyle's operation had identified hundreds of potential targets across Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota. Farmers, small business owners, rural retirees with significant net worth but minimal exposure to financial predators. "It was completely systematic," Rowena continued. "Kyle would research property records to identify high-value targets, then find ways to meet the families socially. Church events, community gatherings, agricultural meetings." "How did he meet you?" "That charity auction last fall. Kyle bid on the farm tour package I donated." Rowena's voice was flat. "He specifically sought me out because he'd already researched our family's assets." The cold calculation was staggering. Kyle hadn't fallen in love with Rowena and opportunistically discovered her father's wealth. He'd targeted our family specifically because we represented a multi-million-dollar opportunity. "Rowena, I'm sorry. I know this is painful to process. Actually, it's liberating. For weeks I kept wondering if Kyle ever really loved me, or if it was all manipulation. Now I know." She managed a weak smile. "It was definitely all manipulation." "Any word on restitution for the other victims?" "The FBI froze Kyle's accounts and seized his assets. They found almost $2 million in offshore accounts." Rowena pulled out another document. "But that's not the best part." "What's the best part?" "Harper & Associates is finished. The Iowa State Bar Association revoked Kyle's license permanently. His law partners are facing their own investigations. And get this, the FBI discovered Kyle's father and brother knew about the elder abuse scheme." "They were involved?" "More than involved. They were co-conspirators. The whole family law firm was basically a criminal enterprise disguised as an elder law practice." I whistled softly. "How many attorneys are we talking about?" 7 lawyers, 3 paralegals, and a network of fake notaries across 3 states. Rowena looked directly at me. "Dad, your investigation didn't just expose Kyle. It brought down an entire criminal organization. Any idea how long they'd been operating?" "At least 5 years, maybe longer." Rowena closed the folder. The FBI estimates they stole over $15 million from elderly victims. We sat in silence for a few minutes, processing the magnitude of Kyle's criminal enterprise. Finally, Rowena spoke again. Dad, Detective Foster called this morning. Kyle's attorney wants to discuss a plea agreement. What kind of plea? Full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. 25 years instead of life without parole. What do you think? I think Kyle should face the maximum penalty, but the prosecutor says a plea deal would guarantee convictions for his co-conspirators and provide closure for the victims. It's not your decision to make, sweetheart. I know, but I wanted your opinion. I looked out across the 920 acres Kyle had tried to steal. Rowena, what matters most? Punishing Kyle or protecting future victims? Protecting future victims? Then support whatever approach accomplishes that goal. Rowena nodded. The prosecutor thinks Kyle's cooperation could lead to arrests in other states. Apparently, this type of elder abuse scheme is more common than anyone realized. So Kyle's downfall might protect families we'll never meet. Exactly. I smiled. Then Kyle's plea deal sounds like justice to me. Rowena leaned back in the porch swing. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. Are you proud of how we handled this situation? Rowena, I'm proud of how you're handling the aftermath. That's what really matters. What do you mean? Any fool can expose a criminal. It takes character to rebuild your life after discovering you married one. 6 months later, Rowena and I were walking through the North 40, checking the corn growth before harvest. The stalks were head high, thick with ears, promising another strong yield. Dad, I've been thinking about the farm's future, Rowena said, stopping to examine a particularly robust plant. What about it? I want to take a more active role, not just inheriting someday, but learning the operation now. I smiled. Rowena, you have an MBA in agricultural business. You're already more qualified than most farmers. But I don't have your experience, your instincts. She looked across the field. After everything with Kyle, I realize how much I don't know about protecting what we've built. What are you thinking? I want to spend the next year learning every aspect of the operation. Financial management, crop planning, equipment maintenance, legal compliance. Rowena paused. And fraud prevention. Fraud prevention? Dad, Kyle targeted us because he thought we were unsophisticated. I never want our family to be vulnerable like that again. I nodded approvingly. What else? I want to establish a victim support fund. Use part of the farm's profits to help families who've been targeted by financial predators. That's a beautiful idea, Rowena. And I want to work with law enforcement to identify other schemes like Kyle's. Maybe prevent some families from going through what we did. We continued walking through the corn rows, and I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with crop yields or land values. Rowena, your mother would be so proud of who you've become. Do you think she would have seen through Kyle sooner than I did? Your mother had good instincts about people, but she also would have wanted to believe the best about someone you loved. Rowena kicked at a clod of dirt. I still can't believe how naive I was. You weren't naive. You were trusting. There's a difference. Is there? Naive people don't learn from experience. Trusting people adjust their boundaries when necessary. I looked at my daughter. You've adjusted yours. Have I? Rowena, 6 months ago you would have apologized for questioning Kyle's motives. Today you're planning to protect other families from people like him. Rowena smiled. I guess I have learned something. You've learned the most important lesson of all. What's that? Intelligence isn't loud, Rowena. It's strategic, and real power comes from protecting what matters. Speaking of protection, what's our next project? I grinned. Teaching you everything I know about forensic accounting. Really? Really. Because the next financial predator who targets our family is going to discover they're dealing with 2 experienced investigators instead of 1. Rowena laughed. The first genuinely happy sound I'd heard from her since the wedding. Dad, I think Kyle picked the wrong family. No, sweetheart. Kyle picked exactly the right family. He just didn't realize we'd pick him right back. We walked back toward the farmhouse as the sun set over the cornfields, planning the future Kyle Harper would never be part of. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. Sometimes the quiet ones have the loudest stories to tell.